Okay, now that we've had a chance to kind of look at some of the real fundamental stuff of how a service might use our networking, let's try to make this a little bit more practical towards our mini hack or towards the actual competition and say, all right, yeah, we're probably not going to have to configure a netcat service. That might be a bit unlikely, but you're certainly going to have to be able to configure a web service. So let's see how a web service on this internal Ubuntu machine can now be leveraged to actually use something like a website. Okay, sure. So let's head over there. Let's kind of remember it's 192.168 our number .2. That's really where we should be operating, and let's see what that's all about here. So one of the things you're going to want to check to see anytime you have a web service is, number one, just what service actually do I have running on this particular computer. In other words, there are multiple potential services that could be running your website, and depending on which one is installed will tell you what are the necessary commands, what are some of the necessary files, how do I restart my service properly. They're not all the same. All right, if you're on a Cent machine, if you're on an Ubuntu machine, if you're on a Kali machine, there's a lot of similarities, but not everything is exactly the same. So don't get attached to this is the one way that you set up a website. No, not true. So first thing I'd emphasize checking is, well, let me just check the available services. All right, so you can check your services using the systemctl command, and checking your services doesn't actually require sudo. You can see what things are running just by running a status. So systemctl status can allow you to search for available services. And so why don't we check for some of the most common services we might have that would run websites. One of the most common ones that you might have is called Apache. And the name of the service many times is something like Apache 2. This is what you might actually download and install and have on the system, and you might have to configure an Apache 2 service. And knowing that is really critical because now you know what to search for online. You can now search for a lot of help and a lot of guides and a lot of resources that can walk you through how to configure simple things or very complex things using an Apache 2 service. So let's give it a try. And you can kind of see here it says, like, yeah, we got some response. So it says that this is currently loaded, but it is inactive. Okay, but it's there. We have an Apache HTTP server. Okay, great. So we can kind of hit Q to just go back to our terminal and sort of leave the status mode. What are some of the others you might want to check as well? It's like, well, they're also, if you were running something like Apache inside a Cent machine, you would check something like an HTTPD, systemctl status HTTPD. And many times on an Cent-based computer, that would actually give you information about your web service. If we try that on our Ubuntu computer, we can see it's like, well, no, that service isn't actually installed. There is no HTTPD service that we can reference using systemctl here on Ubuntu. But on CentOS, many times that would give you information about your web service. You can see, is my web server currently online? Is it offline? Are things working? Are things not working? Etc. Another really good one to know about would be systemctl status and then nginx. Nginx. We pronounce it nginx. All right, so systemctl status nginx, that's another one that could potentially be installed to create a website and manage a web service. So you kind of want to be checking for, I'd say, all the above. Just see what's installed. And this is kind of a silly thing that might happen, though, is what if you had more than one? What if one was installed and configured to behave one way and another was installed and configured to behave a different way and you didn't realize that there were two? All right, so these are some good things you kind of want to check to see, find out what's there, find out what's not there, and that might kind of explain why some of the things are actually happening that there are. So we kind of found out we have to hone in on this particular challenge in this device. We're going to take a look at our Apache 2 service. Another good place to kind of check is just look in etc. All right, I know it can be a little crazy whenever you do something like ls of /etc because there's so many results. But remember, anytime that you're looking inside etc, it's like you probably have some type of configuration file that's located inside etc, and that's where a lot of your configuration is actually done from. So yeah, you can actually see we have an Apache 2 folder that's found inside etc, and you could go looking for things like /etc/nginx. All right, and seeing if you actually have that. Is that something that's installed on your computer? Is there anything there to configure? Or no, it just might not have been installed. All right, so anyways, good also to kind of understand that. Let's actually go there. Let's cd over to that location. I'm going to cd over to /etc/Apache2, and let's take a look inside that folder. I'm going to ls inside that folder. And what you'll see inside here is kind of a variety of configuration files as well as a handful of other folders. All right, and so definitely there's a lot to unravel here when you're trying to learn about an Apache web server. And the same is true when you're looking at one of the other services as well, whether it's Nginx or Apache. There's kind of a lot there. So I'm going to try to keep things as simple as possible in this little crash course video so we can see some of the important places, but I'm not pretending that I'm covering everything. So this is where you definitely want to do some more research to figure out what's actually inside these folders, what's actually inside these configuration files, and under what circumstances am I going to need to know how to mess with this. Let's start with one of the most common things, which is let's just look at the base configuration file that kind of comes here when you have a freshly installed system. And that is what this is a freshly installed Apache 2 configuration. So, all right, let's take a look at it. And all we're going to do is we're just going to look. All right, so I'm going to do a nano of my apache2.conf. It'll tell me this is unwritable, right? If I wanted to actually make changes to this, I would have to open it with sudo, but I'm really not interested in making changes. So I'm okay opening this sort of in a read-only way. And you'll see it gives you lots of information about this is what this file is, this is how the configuration files are structured. There's a whole bunch of detail in this file just to give us information. All right, and so that's a really, really important thing just to understand. But if you start getting down further in the file, you will start getting to some things that are uncommented, right? You're going to start getting to some places where different things might exist or what some of the values are in terms of settings of how your website is going to behave. And this is what I'm emphasizing. I'm not going through what each individual value is. I'm not going through possible values you could add, possible things you could remove, right? That's just not part of what I'm trying to accomplish here today. But I am emphasizing like learning about this and trying to understand some of the structure. Like this is kind of important to do at some point. At some point you want to learn, if you want to master how your Apache server is configured, like definitely this is what you're up against. You have to learn more about what does each one of these little notations mean. And that could be an entire video series all by itself, going through just these notations, which are the common ones you want to learn about and look at, etc. But nevertheless, it's very, very good to be aware of and understand that as a hacker, as someone who's trying to compromise things, like this might be a file that I would come in and try to mess with. Like, yeah, that's kind of an important thing to realize. My main configuration that's running my service, let's start with knowing what that is, maybe make a copy of it, have a backup of it. If you make any changes to this file, again, you want to have some type of copies of maybe before your changes and after your changes, so then you can always kind of recover things in case you terribly screw things up. Okay, fine. Some of the things I'd also like to take a look at would be, notice there are some locations here that have a sites available and sites enabled. All right, so maybe we'll ls out some of those locations, right? So I'll do like a sites available and take a look at there and see, oh, hey, there's more configuration files. All right, so this is a really common thing as you get into a more complex service like a website. A website certainly can become a very complex service. All right, this is where you're going to have multiple configuration files. It's not just one. So you might have one base configuration file that configures a lot of stuff, but you'll start to notice in these configuration files how they will have these include statements. They will say include this other thing, include this other configuration file, include this other configuration file. And so you sort of have this distributed network of configuration files that it becomes useful to start knowing about, right? And we can take a look at the sites enabled one as well and see, okay, we have a variety of these different configuration files that could be used under different circumstances depending on what's actually referenced. Let's take a look at one maybe inside the sites available. I'll just take a look at this very first one. You see there's a 000-default.conf. There's also a default-SSL. So gee, I wonder what that one's going to be for. SSL, maybe if we're looking to configure some HTTPS on our site, maybe that would be an important file to take a look at. Let's just start with the 000-default though. All right, so I'll take a look at that one. I'll do a nano of sites available and then 000-default.conf. Again, I'm not using sudo. I'm not looking to make changes to this. I'm just sort of looking at the file. But you'll notice what it kind of says here is we're starting to learn at least a little bit about some of these the notation of these files. And in these files, you'll start to see these blocks. These sections that have like, here's the start of a block, everything's indented, and if you kind of go down a ways, eventually you'll get to like, here's the end of the block. It'll have this little slash notation that sort of gets added into it. And so of course what they're doing here is they're configuring something about this particular block, whatever it is that they've declared. And the important part about this configuration file is that this is actually where it's telling the Apache web service where it's going to listen, We saw with a netcat service, you had to declare what's the port that you want the server to listen on. Well, with a website, you can declare both. You can declare both the IP address and the port. And right now, fresh out of the box, it's currently declared to listen on star, which means any IP address. So any IP address that you currently assign to your particular Ubuntu machine, the web server will listen on that particular port, or excuse me, it will listen on that IP address. If you had multiple IP addresses, it means it would listen on any of them. All right. But the critical thing about the web server is that it is only listening right now on port 80. So port 80 has been configured to serve up content on any IP address. And this is why we learn, of course, HTTP traffic happens on port 80. Okay, fine. Now, one of the variables here I would like to point out as well is document root. So document root is the location in your file system where your website exists. Right? I'm going to say that again. So the document root is where your website exists. All right, so we are currently looking at configuration files. Configuration files are not the website. They are not the web pages. All right, so the configuration files are found inside /etc. But that's not where the files that actually run your website exist. Most of the time, the files that run your website, they're located in /var/www. That would be kind of a common base location. And in many installations, it'll be /var/www/html. All right, you kind of have to look to see, is it /var/www or is it /var/www/html? And in our case, it's all three of them. All right, but nevertheless, that's a really good thing to confirm and a very good place to start going and inspecting. So I have a web service that's installed. The program is there. We saw through the systemctl status button that it's not currently running, but it is available to listen on any IP address on port 80. That's what this configuration file says. And it's going to serve up information in /var/www/html. All right. Okay, cool. So we've learned a little bit more here about where is our service actually being configured from and what is it going to do, what is it actually going to serve up when someone tries to connect, as well as kind of confirm, yeah, right now it's not currently even running. All right, so let's take a look at that location though, right? If I ls out /var/www/html, you'll be able to see that right now in there, well, there's only one index file. That's it, index.html. That's the only thing that's currently located inside that location. And many of the pages that you might load, you'll see that if you visit a website, the default thing to do is to load up the index.html file that's in that folder. So just visiting the website, most websites are programmed so that if you visit the website, it will try to load up an index.html file, or at least on many systems, it might also try to load up an index.php. So PHP, HTML, two very useful things to understand when we're getting into web coding and when you're getting into what's actually powering the web pages themselves. But either way, you can kind of think of those as that's the default file you're going to have when you visit this location. It's going to load up the index.html file. Well, what's inside it? Let's maybe take a look inside it, right? If I cat out /var/www/html/index.html, you can kind of see it. It just has one little line of text. That's it. This file is owned by Team 0. Oh, okay. So right now I have a file that could be used on my web page at /var/www/html, and it currently has text that says the file is owned by Team 0. Is it actually running right now? We said no, the service isn't actually running. So if I try visiting myself in a browser right now, what should I expect to happen, right? If I type out the 192.168.118.2, what should I expect to happen? It's like, well, the service isn't listening. It tried to connect, but it's not actually listening right now. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of expected. It's expected that when we listen, try to connect to ourselves, the service isn't actually running. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to give it a kick. We have to start the service. So I could do something like a sudo systemctl, then maybe we'll do a start Apache 2. That's the service that I'm running. I'm not doing Nginx. I'm not doing the HTTPD service. All right, that would be useful maybe if I was on a different operating system. But on this one, I've got sudo systemctl start Apache 2. And we'll see. All right, let's verify our password. Does it actually work? I don't know. It didn't give me any errors. It didn't tell me there was anything wrong with the configuration files. It's like, well, let's take a look. Let's maybe check the status again. I'll do a systemctl status Apache 2. And you can see now, hey, now it's actually active. It's currently running. All right, so apparently, yes, this has started up. As before, it said it was that it wasn't actually active. It was inactive. So now the service is actually running, and what I would expect now is that if I try visiting this in a browser, right, if I try doing something like 192.168.118.2 and I try loading it up, it's like, hey, now the data that was in that particular file now loads and is interpreted here by the browser. Notice how you did not have to say index.html. That's built into the coding of your Apache 2 server. It's built into the coding to say, if you don't specify anything, let's try opening the index.html file that's there. Let's try opening the index.php file that's there. That's what many installations will do, and many websites will kind of do by default. All right. So, okay. So it's not that the index.html isn't necessary. It's just it's built into the coding, and now I can go and read the files. Now, this is also, I think, a really critical thing to just sort of reflect on as well, to understand that when you're viewing things through a browser, you're really just viewing files and folders on another computer. Right? When you access things through a browser, you're looking at files and folders that are on another computer. Right? There's some location somewhere. You've got some /var/www/html, and stuff has been put inside those folders. And right now there's an index.html file that's currently inside there. Well, what if I try to try adding some of my own? What if I try adding my own directory inside there? And again, you'll start to see, in order to add to some of these locations, this might require sudo. But what if I tried something like a sudo mkdir of /var/www/html, and I'll make one called James. Right? I'll make a James folder inside of there. It's like, okay, so now I just made a new James folder that's inside the location where my website is currently contained. It's like, well, what happens if I try visiting it? What if I now go to this particular location and do a /James? It's like, well, now it's loading up the James folder, and it shows you, well, there wasn't an index.html file in this folder. So this is what the contents of this particular folder are. So if you ever see a page like this, if you've ever encountered something like this on a web page, what's happened is you've hit a folder, and that folder did not have an index.html to show you. So instead, many web pages are kind of programmed to show you, well, here's the stuff that is inside this folder. All right. It's like, okay, well, what happens if we made one? What happens if we made an index.html file? So maybe I'll just make a silly file. I'll just make an empty one, right? I'll do a sudo touch /var/www/html/James, and then I'll make an index.html. It's like, okay, so now I made the folder. What happens if I reload this same exact page? It's like, well, now I don't get the listing of all the folders. Now I get just a blank page, right? Because I have a blank file. So there was a file there to load, but the file was empty. All right. And so realize that your browser will look for these particular files and try loading them if they exist. And if they don't exist, it might just show you here's the contents of a particular folder. A lot of this also would now tangent into, well, how do you build HTML files? How do you build PHP files? And at this point, I'd say, go take a course on how to do that. Right. That's not something I'm going to emphasize. How this isn't really meant to be an HTML coding or a PHP coding type of training activity. But we could now pivot into those types of web building style efforts so that we could learn more about about how our web pages actually work. I'm trying to get us to understand the structure of this, and also understand it from a content perspective, from a file system perspective, from a service perspective, and finally from a security perspective. All right, because we should be able to understand too that, well, maybe I could use something like a web service to steal data. All right, certainly you would want to pay attention to what kind of data is actually showing up on my website. So I'm sure we could all think of a file that would actually be really sensitive from our computer's perspective, and that would be something like the shadow file. So what if I did something like this? What if I did a sudo copy /etc/shadow? I'm going to copy my shadow file, and I'm going to put it inside maybe that new James folder I just created, /var/www/html/James. It's like, well, with sudo, I'd be able to copy it. Now you're going to run into, I think you're going to run into a little permission issue. Let's try it. Let's just first confirm the file is there, right? If I do an ls of /var/www/html/james, it's like, yeah, the shadow file is currently there. But if you try to access the shadow file that's currently inside there, it's going to say, yeah, you don't actually have permission. So let's go check the permissions on this. Whoops, I hit the wrong one. Let's go check the permissions on this. If I do now ls-l, we'll add on the -l option to that command and see. It's like, well, yeah, the shadow file is there. It's owned by root. And you kind of see for the everyone else, it's like, well, they don't have permission to see it. So the website itself doesn't actually have permission to read one of the files that's inside the directory for the website. So you can have files that are in your website directory, but the website has to have permission to read them. There needs to be read permission kind of on these. So, but that's something that we could go and add now. We could actually modify this of the copy of the shadow file we made. So I'm not going to modify the permissions on the original shadow file. I'll just modify it here on the one that I've copied. So I could do a sudo chmod. Maybe I'll go crazy and say 777 /var/www/index or HTML James, and then finally the shadow. All right, that's the one that I'm now giving full permissions to. And so now if I reload it, it's like, well, in like 2 commands, I was able to take the entire shadow file and dump it out here on the website. All right, so again, you understand this from a file system perspective. What are the files that are actually showing up on this particular computer? It's like, well, now it becomes really important what's contained inside those locations. You got to get the content correct, but we also want to think about this from a security perspective. Is there anything inside there that would be damaging to my effort? All right, you can imagine how a hacker might break into your website and then try to deface your website. They're going to show inappropriate things. They're going to dump out your shadow file. It's kind of like getting caught with your pants down from a security perspective. You know, now people can laugh at you and say, ha ha ha, what a terrible business you are. You know, you guys suck at security. And so, you know, that's going to affect your customers and all that. So, but nevertheless, it's like we're hopefully seeing this is where the files are. This is how some of the permissions might work when you've got a service that needs to run, and where some of the configuration is actually happening from. Now, if we really hone in on what we're trying to accomplish from this activity, right? Let's log back in and take a look at our instructions. They told you your website should contain the string team and then your number on the root web page. So that's on the main index.html. When I visit your page, it should say team and then your number. That's part of the challenge. So part of the challenge is to bring the website online. Part of the challenge is also to make sure your website has the correct content, which is why right now when we start out in the mini hack, your root website, if I just visit your IP address and nothing else, it says Team 0. You don't have the correct content on your page. And that's definitely something that you're going to do to prove that you actually have control of your page, right? Bring the service online and bring it online with the correct content. You're now starting to prove ownership of this particular page. So, but hey, now we know where to modify that. We know that there's that index.html that's inside /var/www/html, and that's something that we can now take a look at. So how about I change that, right? I'll do a sudo nano /var/www/html/index.html. Here we are. And now I can actually go in here and say, well, now this file is not owned by Team 0. How about it's owned by Team 118? That's my number. My number was 118, so I could put in this is now owned by Team 118, and I'll do a Control-X-Y enter to be able to save that. So if anybody visits my website now, I refresh the page, and it's like, well, nope, it's owned by Team 118, and I've kind of claimed ownership of something that was there, right? I started up the service, and I claimed ownership of the files that were in there. And that's a lot of what you'll be doing at the actual competitions. You'll have to get various services working, but you'll have to prove that you have mastery of it or you have control of it by putting specific information, specific content in specific places. And so reading through instructions like this, these little how do you actually score, these are critical. And I've seen a lot of competition players or students where they kind of forget about this stuff. They get all focused about what should things be configured as. They forget, well, what's the content that needs to go in there as well, right? Maybe you made a backup of your configuration file. Well, did you make up a backup of the actual website itself? What if somebody destroyed your content? would you have a way to get the content back? I mean, in this case, it just says team and then a number, so it's easy enough to retype. But what if it was an entire document? What if there were multiple files and folders that you had to keep and maintain the integrity of those files and folders? It's like, well, maybe I should have a backup of those as well. Let me have some copies that exist on other servers, other devices, whatever. So, okay, so I've got a website that's now online, and I also have the correct content that's in there. Now, from a scoring perspective, if I hop over to the scoreboard, it currently says, hey, you brought the IP address of your router online, but the website and the web content, we can't confirm that that's correct just yet. And let's think about why. Why would this service, why would this scoreboard not be able to confirm that your website is actually online and that the content is even correct? Because our website is online and the content is now correct. But the problem, of course, is the scoring server is on the 172.20 network. It is not on the internal 192.168 network. So in other words, yeah, we're going to have to configure the router, and we'll get to that here in a moment. But we're still kind of focusing on what's the web server, how does this work, and is it actually working internally, and kind of go from there. So we're not to the point where we've completed the mini hack and actually scoring the service just yet, but we're getting there. We're getting close, and we're understanding pieces here along the way. Why don't we also confirm that things are working from another computer on the internal side of the network? So this is a computer, of course, this was my internal Kali machine. So this is one that also should be able to go and visit that, right? If I pop open a web browser and type out the IP address of the machine, let's pop open a new tab here and say 192.168.118.2. It'd be like, hey, yeah, now I'm actually able to load up the content that was on a different page. So again, from a testing perspective, this is a really good idea. Test things first inside the machine that you're trying to bring online. Then try to test it from some other machine that's on the same network. Confirm that it's working in the machine, confirm that it's working on the same network. The scoreboard kind of confirms, well, it's not working from a different network, right? The routing is not currently set up. That part's not working yet. But at least we're kind of confirming that the internal part is working, and we can see that using our internal Kali machine. Another thing I'd like to kind of emphasize is, what if you were trying to confirm things from, let's say, from a device such as the router? Right? And so if we look at our router, this doesn't have a browser. I can't just go and pop open Firefox here real quick and see, can the router actually go and see the website? It's like, oh, yeah, but that's okay. There are command line utilities you could use to be able to test connectivity and read data from web pages as well. We kind of saw something like Netcat. You could try connecting using Netcat to an IP address and to a port, and it'll give you the data that's there. I'd like to show another one, though, that's very useful when you're dealing with something like a CENT device that doesn't have a GUI, and all that you have there is the terminal. And that's the curl command, curl, C-U-R-L. So C-U-R-L, curl is a way that you can go and make web requests, all here using a command line. So curl is very useful in Windows. It's very useful in Linux. It's not dependent on a specific operating system. It's just very useful utility for going and making web requests. So let's give it a try. You can type out curl space and then an address, right? I could type out an http://192.168.118.2. and be able to see, well, what's the data that comes back when I try curling that particular address. And it tells you, here was the file, here was the information. It said this file is owned by Team 118. So even if you are limited to a command line, you can still use a command such as curl to be able to see, well, what is this web page actually giving off? Now, you could start to run into some problems, of course, of what happens when you get some file that's really, really long, right? What happens if I try curling out that shadow file, right? That was in /James/shadow, right? That was a file that I copied over. It's like, well, the output is so long that it goes off my screen. It's like, well, it did work. It loaded up the data, but sometimes when you do this, the output will be so long, it'll go right off your screen. It's like, well, okay, but don't forget other commands we've done before in the past, right? When you have something that's really, really long, you can try taking that data and how about saving it to a file? And now you can go look through the file yourself. Maybe you'll take the data and pipe it to less. So then you can take the results of the curl command and then scroll up and down through it, right? Let's not forget other things that we've done in previous activities. So maybe I'll take this data and I'll redirect it to some local file called, like, stolen shadow file, something like that. So now it took the data from the website and actually downloaded it. You can see here, it actually transferred the data and downloaded it. It's a small file, snap of the finger, and it's done. And if I do an ls, it's like, hey, now I've got the stolen shadow file, and I could use vi and come into the stolen shadow file, and it's like, now I can use my arrow keys and go up and down through the data. All right, so even if you don't have a full-on GUI and you don't have a browser, you can use commands such as the curl command to be able to go out and see what's the raw data that this particular website is actually giving off. Very useful thing to know how to do. Now, some computers, such as the Ubuntu computer, actually, sometimes it doesn't actually come with curl installed. Let's see if this one actually has it or not, because I know some of them, they won't necessarily come with it. If I type curl here, it's like, yeah, command not found, you can install it. Yeah, they tell you how to install it, but it is possible you might get a command not found if you try using the curl command. So I'd like to show another one. Another command that you could use that could also do a similar thing is the wget command. Wget, it's more designed to download stuff. It's not going to display the contents right here in the terminal, but you think about it, that's fine. You could just go and download the page and then open it up locally, right? You could cat it out. You could pop open the file with Nano or VI, take a look at it, whatever it might be. So it doesn't really matter if you display it here at the terminal or if you download it, at least most of the time when you're trying to explore things. But using the wget command is a way you could also do this. So let's try typing this out: http:// and I could do my 192.168.118.2, right? And now when you try this, it says, permission denied. I notice where I am. I'm in /etc/Apache. So I don't have permission to download a file and save it to /etc/Apache. Let's not put random files in our /etc/Apache. Let's go back to our home directory. I'm going to cd back over to tilde in my home directory, and then I'll run the command. It wasn't a problem with the command. It was a problem with what my working directory was. It tried saving it right there inside /etc/Apache. Okay, so you can see it went and downloaded the file, right? It happened in the snap of a finger, really, really small file. Index.html has now been saved. And if I look inside my home directory, here it is, right? And I could cat out my index.html, and there it is. So using things like wget, using things like curl, very useful commands for being able to read web pages when all that you have is a terminal. It's a very quick way you can just confirm what's actually on this page. Is anything actually responding, or is the website currently unavailable? So look with the browser, look with the command line, get used to kind of seeing data that servers are giving off from a variety of perspectives. Maybe even use something like Netcat. Use a variety of different tools to look at data, and you might start picking up on some different details that you just didn't notice necessarily before. Okay, one last really important thing to understand here as we're wrapping up our web page section is to understand a little bit about the services themselves. So this is a good example of how when we turned on this server, this was a kind of a brand new Ubuntu computer that got turned on, and Apache was there, but we noticed Apache wasn't running when I turned on the computer, right? When we did our initial systemctl status of Apache 2, we noticed that it wasn't actually running. It was inactive. And the place where that's actually coming from is this section right here where it says disabled. Okay, that means that the program is installed, but disabled means it's not going to turn on automatically when you restart the computer. So this is a really important thing that a lot of new people, they confuse it. Is a service running or is a service enabled? Those are two different questions. Enabled and disabled means, is it going to start when you restart the computer? Running as opposed to stopped is, well, what's the status of it right now in this very second? So you can see that this particular service, because I restarted it or because I started it, it's currently active, but it is also disabled, which means if I restarted the computer right now, the service would not automatically turn on. So this is another thing that you can control with systemctl, and this will require sudo. You could do a sudo systemctl enable Apache 2. That doesn't start the service. That just means that when the computer starts, it will automatically turn on. You'll see it will go and change it. It'll create some files. And now when I check my status, it no longer says disabled. It now says enabled. All right. So enabled and disabled are useful things to know about. And you kind of just got to ask yourself the question, when I turn on this computer, do I want this service to start automatically or not? Do I want it to wait for me to actually go and give it a kick and start it up? All right. And so I could also stop a service, right? I could do a sudo systemctl stop Apache 2. And now when I check the status of it, it's like, well, it's not currently running. It's currently inactive, but it is currently enabled. So if I restarted the computer, it would change from inactive to active, providing that the service is still configured correctly. All right. So understanding start, stop, restart, enabled, disabled, these are some really important things when we start learning about services. And, this is where, some of the new people, what I've seen is, they configure their Apache service, they bring it online, something bad happens to their computer, and they try restarting their computer. And then when they restart the computer, they go to check their website, and it's like, oh no, my website's gone. It's like, actually, it just didn't start automatically, and you just got to give it a kick and turn it back on. So, little things like that kind of go a long way when it comes to, let's have these things turn on automatically. Let's check to see what is their current activity. Are they inactive or are they currently running? Is it enabled or disabled? That's some stuff, good stuff to understand. Lots of services will come automatically enabled. Lots of services, as you can see like this, like the Apache service, this one was installed, but it was disabled. And that was normal. All right, that wasn't something that I changed when I gave you this machine. That was actually how Apache comes. You can install Apache, and it will, by default, not be running, and it'll be disabled until you manually go and bring it all online. So, but not every service is like that. There are some other services that they're a little bit more proactive about becoming enabled and turning themselves on and trying to run. So, good things to check, and that's why, again, we want to get more practice reading some of the details here out of our systemctl status command. Okay, great.